it's hard to put a dynamic or put a quality on how much faith has impacted every
Mm-hmm.
of my life, and how that faith has been shifting according to what I'm reading. Or
Mm-hmm.
there's that core faith that I grew up knowing these truths. But we had some things in our church, like we didn't have instruments
Right.
in church because there was a lack of instruments in the New Testament, a very clear lack. And so we took that as a pattern to say,
Mm.
well, God doesn't want you to have instruments in church.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so starting a rock band in that scenario was uh,
A big departure.
it was like a huge departure from that, and we're going against the flow. And
Mm.
our dad took a lot of heat for it, but we did it, and eventually it was going to become this huge problem. But so how did that impact the way I write music? Just even the fact that I'm playing an instrument on stage is in direct contradiction to how we interpreted scripture as children.
Right. Yeah.
That's a weird juxtaposition.
Mm.
But our parents were so supportive, and so my relationship with faith has obviously had to address that.
Right.
What do
Yeah.
I think about the way scripture interacts with instruments in the church? And
Yeah.
obviously, I'm using that as a metaphor.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting though to hear you say that because I mean, I guess you naturally assume that their, music and faith are also linked and I guess so many people get their start in the industry by, what they do in churches and how they start to
Yeah.
pick up instruments and stuff, but it's actually really interesting to hear that, actually doing the music was almost you reevaluating what you knew from what you've been taught. Really, it was a learning process, to get past that almost and reconcile that.
And we could play music outside the church. We could play at high school, but not for not for a church service.
Hmm.
Not where it belonged. And then so that was um, so that kind of opened this door. Well, what else am I accepting as God given truth
Right.
from Scripture that has been interpreted a certain way, that's impacting the way I think about God Himself? And so my journey has taken me into a place where I really want to know the Creator of the heavens and the earth. This God who designed me
Mm-hmm.
as a creative person. I think we all are. We're creative people. We're designed in the image of our Creator, and He made stuff
Right.
out of nothing. He just made stuff. So if we're made in His image, how are we best representing who He is?
Mm.
I think partly by making excellent work,
Yeah.
by inventing interesting ideas and thoughts and music and photography and film and art. We are best representing who He is if we're doing that beautifully and accurately and honestly.
Mm.
I'm reading a book right now from it's called Art and Faith, or Faith and Art. I can't remember which.
Mm.
A theology of making, and it was written by this guy who he's Fujimara. He's
Right.
a I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but he's a painter, and he does slow painting. So he
Mm.
grinds his own pigments. Everything in his process takes a long time. And he
Right.
coats we're talking about the blank canvas. He
Yeah.
coats his canvas with 70 layers before he starts painting.
Wow.
So this guy takes
Yeah.
his time, and the process informs him and his life is like that too. It's very meditative and thoughtful. And his faith and his art are so mixed.
Mm.
And so when he says, we were born, we were created in the image of God, the creator, it
Right.
bears a lot of weight, you know,
Mm.
because he spent so much of his time creating in a slow and thoughtful and methodical way.
Mm.
How can I be more like that in what I'm doing?
Right.
I don't know. And I'm just kind of running with some other thoughts here,
No.
obviously, but so being and he's a Christian painter, but
Yeah.
he also is trained in this ancient art of Matsuki, I think it's called, where
Yeah.
you break a teacup and you mend it with gold. So it's broken, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
in ancient Japan, this teacup would sit around for generations and would get passed broken to the next generation. before they would bring in a master
Wow.
kintsugi artist,
I've never heard of that.
and then he would mend it with gold and some gluing technique,
Yeah.
and he doesn't try to hide the seams, so you can
Mm.
see the gold seams, so it becomes more beautiful and more valuable
Yeah. And
because of the gold.
intentional.
Yeah, it's on purpose. So what a beautiful metaphor for mending broken things and
Yeah.
making it better than they were.
Mm.
What a beautiful metaphor for redemption.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Listening to that guy who's talking about art, it informs what I do as a producer.
Mm.
What did I do as a father, trying to mend my, when my kid gets hurt? How do I encourage her to be better than she was before that? What did she learn? I don't know. There's a lot.
Yeah.
There.
No, and having this faith obviously in the music industry, the way you're working, obviously that must be in some cases you would think, there's natural conflicts and there's ways in which it can be a dark industry, even from what I've seen. I'm only young myself, but from even dipping my toe in the music industry, obviously it can be a dark place. Have you experienced that yourself, and how's it been for you as someone, obviously, in the music industry, as someone seeking to know God more?
Yeah, that's hard because the kind of person I want to be is the person that believes the best about people. And we did consistently run into things in the music industry that were hard to see past, to see the human being behind that decision, especially when it affected our income, when it affected us being 2,500 miles from home with nowhere to stay, sleeping on a stage somewhere with no sleeping bags, and like
yeah,
with our wives, that was, I wasn't married at the time, but my brothers were, and it's hard to see past that decision, and see the person that made that decision. So when I look at the music industry, it's basically just comprised of a bunch of people, human beings that are making decisions. And a lot of those decisions are based on fear of losing their position or losing their job in that industry.
Yeah.
At the time we signed to a major record label, radio was such a huge deal. And I think somebody at the label slipped up and said, well, your target market's the 55-year-old women. We were like, huh?
Right.
It's not who comes to most of our concerts. So I don't know where you've been, but that's who buys the CDs. And in the Christian music industry, that is, so now it's a 60-year-old woman is the average K-Love, like biggest airplay in America.
Right.
60-year-old woman. And that's not necessarily the people that I connect with the most on music, So when you talk about the industry, it's just a bunch of people that are making those decisions, and they're making them based on what they think the next person is going to allow. So the radio DJ has an idea about what his listeners want.
Yeah.
And then the radio programmer at the label, or the radios, the guy who works at the label in the radio department, that his job is to call that radio DJ to pitch the songs.
Make the match, yeah.
He has an idea about what that guy's going to like, about what that guy's going to think the people like. And so then by the time it gets to us, it's so far removed from me playing a song for you.
Right, yeah.
Which is why I've kind of decided in my world, and this is what I always encourage my artists to do, don't even consider who you're writing this music for. Write what you need to write. Write what you are compelled to write, and make it the best you can. And then when it goes out in the world, it's going to connect with the people that need to hear it. And it's going to draw, it's going to be like a magnet to draw. And then the people that hate it are going to hate it. And hopefully they really hate it because you've made something so incredible.
Yeah. Right.
So,
I mean, what you're saying here, it actually reminds me, I don't know if you've read the book yet, but Matthew McConaughey's new book, Green Lights. you should definitely check it out because he talks about a very similar experience where being an actor and going for auditions, and then 1 minute you've got this part and then something happens and then you've lost the part. And he said it took him a while to see when people said it's not personal, it's just business. It actually took him a while to actually see that as the truth, because it got to the stage where he had to assume that of people, that they were gonna almost let him down because it's just business, and that's okay, that's the way it was. So it's interesting to hear your insights in that, because it's obviously a similar a similar situation where you're kind of relying on other people, and you mentioned earlier about even your income being reliant on other people. And yeah, I just thought that was a really good book, especially explaining someone navigating this, the acting industry and movie industry. But in some ways, I guess they're they're pretty similar. They're both creative type industries, and there's so many people and so many opinions and so many factors and what people are pitching and producing and making. And even you mentioned about the ideas and no labels wanting it. Like, it's the same as going for an interview and no one wanting to have you in a film. So yeah, I think you should definitely check that book out. It's really interesting. But
I want to read it for sure.
And again, as someone who, Matthew McConaughey identifies himself, he's a Christian himself, and it's interesting to hear his perspective because it's so vastly different to pretty much anyone else I've ever heard. It's a very interesting read. But seeing as you give me a book recommendation there, I thought I would fire one back at you. But
yeah, that's great.
It's just interesting to hear the similarities, between what you guys are saying. It's just, it must be hard not to take it personally when someone lets you down or someone doesn't get what you're after, like you said.
Yeah, and then also not to be really quick to share that experience. So what I was just talking to a friend of mine who runs a taco / coffee shop a couple doors down here from the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to start a podcast. I have a podcast studio here. And he's like, but I can't talk about food because a lot of my friends run businesses around here. And if I go down the street and I say, oh, their salad was awful and it came out late.
Right.
Because we love to share negative experiences.
Yeah.
I think we're like 8 or 10 times more likely to share a negative experience than we are a positive one. Because it's more salacious. It's like it's noteworthy and newsy.
Well, it's just like how news makes its money off giving you stuff that you're outraged over,
So and back to masterclass. So you learn a lot about the kind of person you want to become watching these creatives talk about their field.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a couple, and I won't name names, but there have been a couple that I thought I just never want to be that guy. The
right.
way he talks about other creatives is so negative. He just looks down on other processes. He thinks his process is the only process and everything else is wrong. And he's baffled. How would someone else do it this way? And I think about that and I'm like, man, that gave me a great picture of how I don't want to talk about other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's so easy to get sucked into the negativity, and it's like you said, it must be difficult, especially in an industry where you're competing and you are critiquing and trying to strive for success. And I guess naturally it seems like a zero-sum game in your head a little bit, where you think, if I'm being successful, that means someone else has to not be as successful. I got to take some of their share, but I guess it's not always that way.
The pie is much bigger than that.
Yeah,
we put so much arrogance in ourselves to think that we're gonna steal from somebody else's, or that we deserve more or whatever.